Some men wear badges. Some men wear uniforms. But these two, they wore something else: arrogance. She wasn't a criminal, she wasn't a threat. She was a waitress, a mother, a survivor, one arm missing but her spirit whole. Yet to them, she was nothing but weakness. A target to slap, a spectacle to humiliate. In front of the entire courtroom, they thought they could break her. Her cries echoed, raw and desperate. "My kids need me." The room froze, except for two officers smirking, proud of their cruelty. They thought the gavel was theirs. They thought justice was theirs. They thought the courtroom belonged to them. But then the back doors opened, and Jasonstatham walked in. Not as a witness, not as a spectator, but as her protector. The judge thought the court was about to see a routine trial. But what they were really about to see was judgment. Not delivered from the bench, but from the man they had just underestimated. The waitress's name was Alina. She wasn't anyone powerful. She wasn't anyone rich. She had no lawyers, no allies, no shield but her truth. For 15 years she had worked the same diner, a place where the coffee was cheap and the hours were long, but where her customers always left full and smiling. She had lived through things that would have broken most. A factory accident years ago had taken her arm, left her body scarred but her spirit unbroken. She learned to pour coffee, carry trays, and scrub tables with one arm when most would have given up. She learned to raise 2 children alone, filling their lives with warmth while she went without. But none of that mattered to the men who sat across from her. To them she was not a mother, not a fighter, not a survivor. To them she was prey. The two officers sat with smug confidence, their uniforms pressed, their hands folded as if they were the very definition of authority. But authority without justice is just cruelty. One of them, Officer Grant, leaned back in his chair like he was holding court himself. His jaw flexed with every smirk, every word dripping contempt. The other, Officer Miller, younger but sharper with his cruelty, let his eyes crawl over Alina with the same sneer a bully gives a cornered victim. They weren't here to testify truth. They were here to crush. And when Alina stumbled over her words, when her voice trembled as she tried to explain how they mocked her disability and twisted her protests into resisting, that's when it happened. The slap. Sharp. Sudden. Final. Her head snapped to the side, the crack of it echoing through the chamber like a whip. A tear streaked down her cheek as her body trembled from the shock. And then the cry. "My kids need me." The benches fell silent, even the air stopped moving. But not them. Never them. Grant and Miller just smiled. At the bench, Judge Mallory adjusted his glasses, but he didn't raise his gavel. He didn't chastise. He didn't even frown. The silence of his robe was louder than the slap. Because in that silence, everyone in the room heard the truth. The judge wasn't going to save her. The courtroom was hers to survive alone. Or so they thought. It started small. A creak of old hinges, groaning under the weight of oak doors being pushed open. Light spilled in from the hallway, cutting a path across the dusty floorboards. Every head turned. Boots echoed against the ground, slow, steady, a rhythm that carried weight, a rhythm that didn't belong to fear. The officers frowned, annoyed at the interruption. The judge cleared his throat, ready to scold whoever dared disturb his court. But then the man stepped into the light. Broad shoulders, a steady stride, eyes that didn't just see, they judged. Jasonstatham wasn't dressed for court, no suit, no tie. Just a simple jacket, boots that had seen more ground than polished floors, and a presence that filled the room before his voice ever did. He didn't glance at the judge. Didn't glance at the benches. Didn't even glance at the officers yet. His eyes found only one person, Alina. The broken mother. The trembling waitress. The woman who had always stood tall, now brought low by men who thought cruelty was power. And in that moment, something shifted. Her tears slowed, her sobs softened. Because Jasonstatham had walked in. Not as an actor. Not as a fighter. But as her protector. The crowd recognized him. You could see it ripple through the benches, relief, awe, fear. The officers didn't. Not yet. To them, he was just another face in the crowd, another nobody who dared interrupt their performance. But the crowd knew. They knew what was coming. Because when Jasonstatham walks into a room, it doesn't stay the same. He stopped just behind the officers, his shadow falling long across the table where they sat. Grant shifted in his chair, irritated. Miller smirked, whispering something under his breath. Jason didn't move, didn't speak. And that silence was heavier than any gavel. The courtroom thought it was about to see a trial. But trials rely on truth. And Jasonstatham had just walked in with something sharper. Judgment. The judge coughed, uncomfortable. The officers chuckled, mistaking his silence for weakness. But Alina knew better. The crowd knew better. Because Jason hadn't come to watch. He had come to end it. The courtroom thought it had just seen humiliation. What it was about to see was reckoning. Jason stood there, silent still. But silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes silence is a warning. The two officers didn't hear it. They laughed instead. Grant leaned back in his chair, pointing lazily toward Jason without even standing. What's this then, another wannabe hero? Miller chuckled, his voice sharp as a knife. Courtrooms full of nobodies today. Guess anyone thinks they can just walk in. The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads, others lowered their eyes. Everyone could feel it, the storm had arrived. But Jason didn't speak. Not yet. Judge Mallory slammed his gavel, the crack like a rifle shot. Order in my court, he barked. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He wasn't in control anymore. The gavel rang hollow against the weight in the room. Because Jason's presence had already shifted the scale. Jason finally moved. One step, just one. But it was enough to make Miller stiffen, his smirk faltering. Jason's voice came low, calm, controlled, the kind of tone that made your blood run colder the longer you heard it. She's not a criminal. His words fell heavy, deliberate. She's not your punching bag. Grant laughed again, louder this time, masking the unease twitching in his jaw. And who the hell are you supposed to be? Jason's eyes cut into him. I'm the man who's going to teach you what respect feels like. The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward. Alina's sobs slowed, her wide eyes locked on Jason as though hope itself had just walked through those doors. Grant stood, squaring his shoulders, trying to look taller than he was. You've got a big mouth for someone stepping into a courtroom with two officers of the law. Jason tilted his head slightly, his gaze never wavering. No, you've got uniforms, but uniforms don't make you men. Your actions do. Gasps rippled through the benches. Even the judge's hand froze over his gavel. Miller shoved his chair back and stood, stepping close to Jason, his finger jabbing into Jason's chest. You think you can walk in here and play hero? This isn't the movies. Jason glanced down at the finger pressing against him, then back up, his jaw tightened. Good, because in the movies, you get a warning. Then came the spark. Miller shoved him. It wasn't hard, it wasn't strong. But it was a mistake. Jason didn't stumble, didn't sway. Instead, he moved. Lightning fast. Jason caught Miller's wrist midair, twisting it with such precision that the younger officer gasped in pain before his brain even realized what had happened. Miller dropped to one knee, face twisted, his smirk long gone. Grant surged forward, fist cocked, but Jason was faster. A single step, a pivot, and Jason's elbow connected with Grant's ribs. The officer wheezed, stumbling back into the table, his badge clattering against the wood. The courtroom erupted, gasps, shouts, the scrape of benches as people stood to see. The judge's gavel pounded again, desperate now. Order, order. But no one was listening, not anymore. Jason stood over both officers, calm as ever, his breath steady, his eyes burning. You call yourselves protectors, he said, his voice carrying through every corner of the chamber. You think a badge gives you power. Power without honor isn't law, it's just bullying. He released Miller's wrist, letting the officer collapse onto the floor, clutching his arm. Grant, groaning, tried to push himself up, but Jason's boot pressed lightly against his chest, not hard enough to harm, just enough to remind him who was in control. The silence was deafening. Jason looked at the judge, who sat frozen, his gavel trembling in his grip. You let this happen in your court. You sat there while they mocked her, humiliated her. That makes you no different. The judge swallowed hard, his lips parting, but no words came. Jason turned back to Alina. Her tears hadn't stopped, but now they were different. Not fear, not humiliation, relief. Jason stepped back, his eyes sweeping the courtroom one last time. This isn't your courtroom anymore, he said softly, but every ear caught it. This is hers. And for the first time that day, the room was quiet. Not because of a gavel. Not because of authority. Because Jasonstatham had delivered judgment. And judgment always leaves silence in its wake.